Good afternoon. I'm Trip Wade, president of Midtown, and of the Wade Company is a local small developer. Last year, with the scheduled resurfacing of State Route 80, Spur 22, we were afforded a once-in-a-generation opportunity to critically assess current conditions, potential redevelopment of 13th Street between Midtown and Uptown. From May 11th to May 27th, GDOT and the city's planning and engineering departments undertook a complete street conversion test to gather data to help inform the streets restriping and future planning. Presently, the properties facing 13th Street between 10th Avenue and 13th Avenue have taken a 61% rate of vacancy in underutilized properties. A recent project partner, director of the Incremental Development Alliance, Jim Kuhlman, observed, and he says, "This section of 13th Street lies between the two most financially productive neighborhoods in Columbus, meaning Midtown and Uptown. The underutilized private property along 13th therefore has some of the largest upside potential in the city due to the difference in value between where they are now and where they could be." At a recent meeting, he also reminded us, "You either change or you change, in either a positive or negative direction if you stay trapped in amber." In other words, we got to do something. It's either going to get worse or it's going to get better. Midtown Inc. with local partners Jackson Bergen Development and the Carmack Company believe that we can repair this long-term disinvestment. As a community, we should do better and expect more. We can change in a positive direction. As you know, Columbus 25, our area's long-term plan to reduce poverty, increase prosperity, improve our quality of life, has prioritized vibrant and connected places as one of its 5 action areas. Implementation calls for promoting vibrant and attractive neighborhoods, corridors, and activity centers. As they see this connection is key, beginning to spread the success of Uptown into adjacent parts of our community, Betsy Covington, chair of the Vibrant Connected Places Action Area, hopes you can see the potential that this 13th Street sketch has to one day be a second Broadway, an additional node of commercial, retail, residential activity that promotes civic and economic health. I don't know if Betsy made it here or not. She was up there. She is. We engaged Rick Hall to analyze transportation and economic data and to help create a long-term vision for the 13th Street connection. Rick is a practicing registered transportation engineer for 21 years, president of Hall Planning and Engineering in Tallahassee, Florida. Rick holds a degree in civil and transportation engineering from Virginia Tech and is registered in 22 states and is committed to understanding the established network, vision, and context before transportation design is undertaken. We appreciate this opportunity for Rick to present his findings to you this afternoon and to this committee this evening. Rick, thank you for being here, and we appreciate you sharing with us your presentation.
Thank you very much. Good to be here. Thank you for coming to this presentation on such a beautiful spring-like afternoon in Columbus. We're here to talk about 13th Street, and I have found this a fascinating project and a fascinating part of your city. So let's get right to it. This is that quote of, "You either change or you change," which is a clever way of saying that you can't stand still. And this next slide, let me show you. This friend of mine, Tony Nelson, is a professor, and he's been speaking on urban design and community building for 40 years now. He's one of the pioneers in the movement for getting these places to be in better shape. And right in the front of his book, The New American Dream, he has this diagram, and it's the built form evolutionary spiral. Now, that's a lot of words for how cities grow and change over time. And the different quadrants on the diagram are as such. You have a growth spurt first, and then you have the optimum development patterns for any given scenario. And then after a while, that goes into decline. And it requires some rehabilitation and redevelopment to climb back into the growth quadrant and to get into the optimum development. So obviously, you're trying to stay in the upper right quadrant for as long as you can, but you can't stay there forever. And that's why the quote that we just read to you is so important. This is a dynamic part of a dynamic city, and in spite of our best efforts to get it in good shape, it will eventually decline for reasons that are even now unknown. So let me show you what that spiral really can be. That's kind of the first spiral. You start in the center, and then I can visualize a sandy road down by the railroad tracks for 13th here in Columbus. And maybe it had a couple of stores or something next to it. And it existed for a while. And then it went into decline. And somebody said, we need to pave that old street. That old sandy street is just not going to cut it. So somebody in the past said, let's pave it. And so it brought it up around that to that top left quadrant. and it cruised along in good shape for a while. But then the inevitable spiral came in and said, all right, you're going to be fine, but then you're going to go back to decline, and you're going to require some rehabilitation again. So I imagine there was a group that said, we need to do something else to this corridor and get it in good shape again, get it back up to the top. This is where you are currently. You're at the bottom. Okay, with 13th Street. Economically, you are at the bottom. It has declined. The businesses, they're not dead, but they're not breathing very well. Okay, they're on oxygen. Excuse me. And so the thing that pleases me most about this project is to see so many people concerned about their community that they have the energy to whip that thing back around to the top of the spiral again. So that's what this whole purpose of this project is, to get 13th Street back to the top of that spiral for as long as it can stay up there. Now the speed of this spiral and how it moves based on Henry Ford producing automobiles on the assembly line. It changes speed when the internet comes in and you can order things from China. So there are many influences and factors that determine the speed of this progress through this spiral. I was going to use a reference to 33 RPM records and 45 and 78, but I realized that a number of the people in the audience probably wouldn't understand what I was talking about because they're used to CDs and on beyond that. So, but this group that is working on this project is setting the speed of that acceleration back into the positive sector. We're talking a lot about walkability. And here's a good definition of walkability. Of course, walkability gives you a safe place, an attractive place, and a place that's good for business. That's proven. We have other examples around the country that have proven that fact. And the definition includes not just walkers, but cyclists and transit users also. And those three modes, walking, bicycling, and transit, we call the forgotten modes because for 50 years, we transportation engineers and many other citizens in communities across the country just kind of forgot about walking. Neighborhoods were developed with no sidewalks at all. Arterial streets would let you fly down in your car, but you wouldn't want to walk or ride a bicycle, and those things were for children, so they were forgotten for quite a number of years. You're vulnerable when you are walking or riding a bike or taking transit. If it rains, you're going to get wet. If it's hot, like it gets in the South in the summertime, you're going to be uncomfortable. So it's a vulnerable mode, but it's so vitally important because it's the healthiest and most efficient mode you can take for yourself and your body. And it's good for the fuel efficient nature of your economy. It's just a wonderful series of modes that you can apply and design for the shortest trips. Nobody's going to expect you to walk 14 miles to get to your office, but you may walk 14 miles as a recreation walker. And now that's recreation walker definition is you go out one door, and no matter how far you go, you come right back in that same door. Because normally you're not dressed well enough to go be presentable in another building or someone else's house or an office. But destination walkers leave one door and go into a different door and stay there for a while. And that's the kind of trip that can help the transportation system, so not as many cars have to be used for the shortest trips in your system. And notice that it also includes motorists. We're not fans any longer of the car-free zone or the walk-only opportunity. We tried that for 80 cities in the US tried this, and they all failed because the business did not have enough customers visiting the stores without the presence of automobiles going by on the street. And they were a little creepy, in the darker hours and the rainy days, because there was not enough action on the street. They were deadly. So not many of those are in place again today. There are 2 or 3 of them, but it's not common. Now the automobile is so, frankly, seductive. You have your protection from the sun and the rain and criminals, and you can go as fast as you want to, within reason. So that's the protected mode. That's the non-vulnerable mode. That's why it has been so dominant in the American landscape. So what we need, though, is this last word, very important. We need a balance of all those modes together for the shorter and longer trips and for the urban and the suburban places. So we need to just take a broader look at our transportation and land development patterns than we ever have before. And that's beginning to happen. A good friend of mine, Peter Norton, a historian. He's not an engineer, planner, elected official. He's a historian, and he documented what happened in this country between 1900 and 1940 to take us from riding trolleys and walking and riding bicycles to only automobile movement for our personal mobility. And he goes year by year, sometimes week by week, and pulls newspaper articles that proves what a tough fight it was for the interests of the automotive industry to actually get with the federal government and lobby for more automobile width of roadways and speed of roadways. So it's not just that everybody fell in love with the automobile and we all had to change our cities. It was a forced exercise. Very important. Very important to know this history if you want to change things back to greater walkability, greater bikeability, and better urban form. So you got to know the history before you can change it and go in a different direction. Another good book, Christopher Lineberger, sorry. And Chris Lineberger is a real estate professional as well as an urban designer. And in all his studies, he's concluded that in the United States, we now have 2 types of places, 2 cities. We either have drivable suburban or we have walkable urban. When you go downtown, you can park your car and go to a restaurant, you can go to a concert, you can go by church and get back to your car. And so that's a walkable place that you're all familiar with, downtown Columbus. But once you get in the suburbs, then it's a drive-only situation. People go to a big box shopping center area, and they go to one store, and then they go back to their car and drive down over here and go to another store, right? Everybody's done that, right? So you don't walk from store to store in a big box power center because it's not designed for that. So it's clear to understand those two kinds of places that exist out there. And I'm giving these little symbols of two walkers for the poor walkability places, and 5 for the ones that are really very walkable. Here's one that looks like it's about 140 years old, but it's only about 20 years old, 25 years old. Winter Park, Florida. Every time we put the buildings to the back of the sidewalk, and we build a sidewalk, and we put in street trees, and we have parked cars on the street, the pedestrians always show up, every time. Unless you're just in a destitute Rust Belt situation where there are no jobs. But if you have jobs in your community, and if you have people that have businesses they want to open, you build it this way, and everybody will start walking for the shortest trips in their daily mobility where they move about. And remember, not long distance trips for walking or bicycling. Sometimes the bicyclers, when they really get on a good program, they will commute 10 miles. They will commute 12 miles. A neighbor friend of mine in Tallahassee commutes about 14 miles. He's a dentist, goes down to his office, works all day, and rides his bicycle all the way back home. But he's obviously the unusual guy. So that's a very walkable setting. Here's one that's not so walkable. This is an area that has a building adjacent to the street in Tallahassee, in the area of Gaines Street. And I'll talk a lot about Gaines Street as we have one of the best examples of what you're thinking about doing that's already completed in Tallahassee. And we studied it for a long time because all the planning ideas were emerging. But it took about 6 or 7 years to go from where you are now to a really polished Gaines Street. Now, maybe 5 years to go through to the stage that Gaines Street is right now. So, but it's a very excellent. But this is what it used to look like. And look, they've got 2 different signs trying to sell this place, and trying to offload it so it can be redeveloped into something else. Now this is Gaines Street in its finished form. This is obviously highly walkable. This is the state capitol off here in the horizon. It's a, 50-story, 60-story building in the background. And Florida State University is just to your left, and Florida A&M University is to your right from this location. So it's centrally located. It could not remain in a dilapidated situation. It just could not, because you have the Capitol and 2 universities all surrounding it, all very active sectors. And this was it's an old industrial street that just needed to be done for economic reasons. Notice the great sidewalk, and this is a one-way lane and another one-way lane with lots of pedestrian modern features to maybe a little overdone on the signage, but that's the way they're doing it. Here's another view of Gaines Street, highlighting several things. Yes, the trucks can still make it through. You can get your food, you can get your FedEx package, because the streets will be sized such that the trucks will still move through. Okay, that's not a problem. But take a look at this. This is what we call a rain garden. When the water hits the street, it washes right into that lower area where you have plants. Then it collects the water for a while and purifies the water, and it finally slowly seeps in, gets absorbed into the surrounding turf. And so there are 6 or 8 of these things along the corridor. That's a very innovative element that you can do to help solve some of your drainage issues. And there's a low wall that people could just sit on and have a conversation. And so these were some of the great features that were built into Gaines Street. And then we're back to 13th Street. This is what it looks like today. It only gets two, and it's a stretch to get those two walkable figures up there, okay? Because nobody really wants to do much walking on the current 13th. You do have some traffic signals. I have a device right here that's a radar gun. It's called a pocket radar gun. You push that red button and you get the speed of the car that's approaching you. So I had this with me over my first visit, and then yesterday and last night. Last night, when we were speaking with some other people about this project, I clocked some people at 45 miles an hour in one of those lanes that's out there on 13th. And 45, keep that speed in mind. That was one of the faster ones. Most of them were at 42 and 38. But the posted speed is 35. And it's just a dysfunctional speed if you want the walkability and the pedestrians to enjoy themselves on the side of the road. I mean, it's so dysfunctional that this sign appears on the front door of one of the businesses that's still existing. Like, please don't park here, and please, go around to the back. Don't do anything in and out of this door. And that's a pretty sad commentary on the health of 13th Street. Just a forlorn pleading to get behind me. Now, this is an important diagram. If you are unfortunate enough to be hit by a moving car, you're in a crosswalk or they're making a turn and they hit you, if that vehicle is going 20 miles an hour, there's only about a 5% chance that you will be a fatality. But if you get it up to 30 miles an hour, it goes over 50%, your chance that you will die from that crash. And if it's at 40, forget it. It's over 80% that you will not survive that crash. And remember what I clocked last night, 45. That 45 person, if they step out in front of a car going that fast, they're toast. So this is very important to our understanding of why we need to manage the speeds well. And there's clear evidence that the safety of the pedestrians, which is a paramount interest to everybody, they're protected. Now, there are walkability factors we use in the planning of these kind of streets to get the elements right, all the pieces. And this is a David Letterman countdown backwards, 10 is street trees. They're important to you. They provide shade to your walking and your parked car. There are traffic volumes. You want those to be a little lower than usual. Sidewalks, not even in the top 5, okay? Narrow streets are good. They help manage the speeds of the motor vehicles. Interconnected streets. You need a web of streets for you to take as a pedestrian for that last part of your trip. So a whole network, and your grid that is downtown and along this stretch of 13th is very, very strong in this particular category. You have a good interconnected set of streets. On-street parking, very important, very important. It not only does it help slow down the vehicles that are passing by. I mean, nobody's going to drive 60 miles an hour past a row of parked cars, right? If there's only one lane. So the on-street parking, I often say parking produces pedestrians. My wife tells me that's alliteration. She's an English teacher. But parking produces pedestrians. You park once and the two people get out and they may go to two different, I'll go to the post office, I'll see you over at the cafe. And then we'll go to the concert after, and then we'll get back in the car. So parking is important for the people that don't live in the immediate community to get in and use all the mix of uses, and it's a very healthy way for people to get around and not having to drive from place to place to place. Lower traffic speeds, we've spoken about that. Mix of uses. If you are not able to go to a different use, building land use type, than where you started, then why go? If there are nothing but offices in the entire 8-block area, you just don't have that much opportunity unless you're going to one of the meetings with people in that other office building. But you have to have a mix of uses. Buildings have to front the street. We've talked about that. And that's the best way. You don't want to get out of your car and park it and then look at 6 rows of baking cars in a parking lot before you can get into that door over there that has the air conditioning in the summertime, right? You don't want to have to wind your way beyond a bunch of parked cars. So the buildings have to come up to the sidewalk to serve you better as a pedestrian. And number 1 is small block size. It's not too exciting really, but small block size will get you your buildings to the front because they can't wander to the back of the lot. They'll get you mix of uses because you have a lot of different blocks that different kinds of buildings can occupy. And then it lowers the traffic speeds because you have more intersections per mile, and it helps with the traffic speed. So it helps with a lot of things. Small block size, you have small block size. That's one of the really positive things about Columbus downtown and Columbus along 13th. So a key solution is to, as a community, have your staff, have your good planning staff, map these urban and suburban places. Once you define where they are, or define what they are, then you can see where they are. And, oh yeah, that's suburban, and oh yeah, this is urban. So you can color the maps and get your entire city analyzed for what the character and the context is. Then once you do that, then you design your transportation facilities to match that. If you like what you see, then you want to have an ordinance that does preservation for all the land use exactly the way it is. And you kind of freeze the city to the extent you can slow down that spiral, if you keep, moving around. But if you don't like something, then you can change it. You can change it from suburban to urban, or you can change it from urban to suburban, or even rural to urban. So the key thing is know where you are, and then design your streets and sidewalks and everything else according to those patterns that you see. In the old days, we had arterials in rural areas, and then when they pass through a suburban area, then you may go from 65 to 45, but that was the extent of the arterial slowdown. Okay, and we only had 2 land use types to play with in the design and planning book. Well, that's all changed now. We have many more, and many more areas to deal with, and they're classified. So we have a compact urban that now shows up, like your old downtown, like 13th could be, and for that you can go down to 25 as a speed for an arterial, even a state highway that's going through your compact urban area. You can have a new compact urban. You can take Farmer John's Field. You can take the Ace Battery Factory. That's a brownfield. And any time you get an area that's scraped clean and you get to start fresh, then you can say, well, we want this to be a compact place where people can walk around. So you can just designate that from your comprehensive plan and your other activities with the city. I will say the Georgia DOT has been extremely cooperative on this entire project. It's their road, it's their jurisdiction. But they have been very positive about the potential of changing this from a drive-only place back to a walkable place like it used to be. Now, their current procedures today don't allow you to do 25 miles per hour on an arterial that belongs to GDOT. But we have been successful in some other places getting the speed limit posted down to 25. You may end up with 30, which would be an improvement on those red bars, but we'll see how that works out in the future. Now the functional classification is rural and suburban and compact urban. And you see the small block size in the compact urban. and the large block size in the suburban and rural. That's a key difference in the transportation networks that get planned in these three different context areas. This is a book that came out from the Institute of Transportation Engineers and the Congress for the New Urbanism jointly, and it's Designing Walkable Urban Thoroughfares. It's about 10 years old now, and it was the first time that engineers sat down together with architects and planners and said, let's get some better streets for these more compact urban places instead of creating the raceways like you have on 13th. This is a great old plan done by a designer named John Nolan. John Nolan, before the Depression in the 1890s, the 1910s, and the 1920s, was active all over the eastern seaboard. He did about 20 projects in Florida. He worked on Columbus. And you see that fine grain grid pattern that he was able to develop. And he knew how to do it then. Then the Depression came, and most of these guys were out of business. And by the time the Depression was over, they had either died or retired. And so a whole craft of how to put cities together just evaporated. Just evaporated. And we forgot about how to do it right. And now we're learning how to do it right again. And it's a good time to be in the profession. This is the project we're speaking of. I think most of you know the speed limit is 35. You go over the rail yards, end up at 13th Avenue. And this is the good section that's already been reduced to 3 lanes. And it's performing quite well. And so that's where the project is. So existing, the urban design and the transportation design were done separately for your current version of 13th Street. The engineers that decided to scrape the parking off and give you extra travel lanes were not thinking about any of the businesses along each side of the road and the degree to which it would plunge those businesses into a lower economic status. And so this is before we got this place-based design and planning worked out like we have it today. The pedestrian scale was ignored. They didn't know really whether they were suburban or urban. They didn't really understand it, so it didn't turn out very well. The local economy was not considered important when that street was made a 4-lane highway in such an important part of the city. That's one of the key components. When you're considering the future of 13th, you really need to debate this context. Is it urban? Is it suburban? Is it rural? Where are we on that context? That's where the debate needs to be. Once that is decided and the policy is set forth, the transportation is just a matter of knocking out the design for one mode of transportation or the other. So the question is to walk or not to walk. That is the question. Now let's talk about traffic for a minute. You all remember that last spring there was a test in May of all the ugly orange cones out there in the middle of the street, and people said, what in the world is this? And it was there for quite a while, so some people got used to it. And these are the traffic measurements that were made during those, a typical measurement made during those, the period of the study. This is midnight to midnight on the traffic scale. And of course, when people wake up, they get out and they start moving around. That is 9 o'clock in the morning when that peak goes up. And then it stays up considerably well through the day. So it's well used in those middle hours of the day. Some streets that you count go way down and have a valley in the middle of the day where the street is unutilized. That's very inefficient. But that happens on some of the commuter routes. But this stays up all day, and the most important number on this entire chart is this one, 700. you see that none of your background counts that were taken before the test, or the blue line has counts that were taken during the test, none of them were greater than 700 vehicles per hour. 700 vehicles per hour. And the reason that's important is, how do you measure corridor capacity? There's no such thing as daily capacity, because you could still get out there and drive at 2 in the morning, you see. So you have to measure capacity on an hourly basis. And so it's the maximum hourly flow that it's possible to get through the intersection. Not the mid-block, but the intersection. And so it's like an hourglass where this is your intersection. And that's the narrowest part of the capacity measurement. All right, a little math here, a little arithmetic. Engineers have measured traffic for years, and we've discovered a scientific phenomena that if you have plenty of demand behind you, cars go by at about every 2 seconds. Whether you're going fast on an interstate or whether you're going slower in the city. 1,000, 2 1,000, 1,000, 2 1,000. That's about the pace at which cars go by. And test that yourself sometime in a busy situation. 2 seconds per car, regardless of speed. Because at the higher speed, you separate from the car in front of you. At least that's what you were told in your driver training book, right? Now this applies everywhere except Atlanta, where there are a lot of NASCAR fans that want to draft behind you, at 70 and 80 miles an hour, 6 feet off your bumper. But most of the time, 2 seconds per car. And that equates to 30 vehicles every minute, 60 divided by 2. And then you get, by hour, it's 1,800, which is 30 vehicles per hour times 60, per minute times 60 minutes per hour. So it's 30 times 1,800 vehicles per hour can fit down a single lane in an urban setting, if the signal doesn't turn red. So that's 100% green time that happens. And so when you get to the signal, which is the crucial part of the capacity, you all know, if it's green all the time, which is completely unrealistic, then you get that 1,800. But if it's 1/2 the time, 900. And if you get 2/3 of the green time, and I haven't checked the timing yet on 13th, but I think it's probably between 50 and 60%. But you get between 900 and 1,200 vehicles per hour that can fit down that lane with the signals operating. Now, what was your highest measured hourly volume last spring? 700. You're with me. 700. You have a headroom of 700 up to 1,000. You have 300 cars per hour that are likely room for growth, and so the 2 lanes, one in each direction, for all of that volume, it can handle it throughout the entire day. So that's the traffic result of the analysis from last spring. So we're comfortable with it. GDOT is comfortable with it. We've had conversations with them. They participated in the traffic counts and the study. So back to the existing condition. You got the 4 lanes with 2 lanes in each direction. I'll have to admit, this is a fake sign. This is not really there. If you go up to the first block from the eastern end of the bridge, the viaduct is back here in the background. And you'll see the no parking sign. That's clearly there. But we needed to have a speed limit sign there for reasons I'll show you. This is a computer-enhanced image of the future condition of next year after the GDOT project is finished. After the GDOT project is finished, you could have parking in the outside lane, angle parking on the other side, 1 lane here, and 1 lane coming the other way. with turn lanes like you now have. There's no need to cut out any of those turn lanes. In fact, we need the turn lanes to allow you to come down 13th in the 2-lane section and get off of 13th and go 1 block north or south and use the rest of the good tight network you have to get from A to B. So that's the end of the project after GDOT does their resurfacing and restriping. Then look at the difference here. Look at the buildings on the side and what could potentially happen. And this is not fantasy. This is the kind of transformation that happened on Gaines Street down in Tallahassee. Once the street was calmed and parking was available for the business owners and operators to take advantage of when people wanted to come into their front door, this is the kind of redevelopment that is very much real. And then as it matures, this is the kind of appearance that you could have on 13th. With the trees maturing, you have a new mast arm down here that replaces the swinging lights there. There could be a median here with flowers. If the final design comes out that way, you want it, it could be done. And let me show you the that's an enhanced view of the viaduct that goes over the railroad track. Wow. And notice that the pedestrian scale lighting is there, like you have in other places around town. And this car, which is is now in a right turn lane, they're going to turn right and go down 10th. The outside lane is striped off, so you would have a 4-lane viaduct instead of a 6-lane viaduct. And that'll control speeds coming across there, and it'll blend better going 4 into 2 instead of 6 going into 2. You don't want that. So the outside lanes are effective turn lanes coming east. And notice that there are 2 lanes here, 1 there and 1 there. And the 3rd lane that exists on the viaduct today is striped off and not available for automobile use. Now, after you get all of this accomplished, you can decide as a community what you want to do with that extra 12 feet of space, whether it's bicycle or trail or planting trees in urns along the road. I'd like to see a watch opportunity for watching the railroad activity. You know, take your kid that loves Thomas the Tank Engine out there and let him watch the trains operate a couple of times a year. So that's it. That's the future potential economic redevelopment of 13th. And that is when the trees are more mature, or less mature, and the buildings are there. And that is with the existing buildings and the new street, or you could just leave it this way. So notice that 35 changes to 25. See, that's our desire to get the potential fatality level down, as seen by that other slide. Now here's a drawing of what it looks like. We call this a cross section where you cut through the street. And today all you have is the ability to drive cars on these 4 lanes. And then these people really would not be standing out there in those numbers today. Okay, there are 4 of them, highly unlikely, because the fast cars going that close to them is a very uncomfortable thing. But all the lanes are 12 all the way across. And it's a total of 60 feet between the curbs. That's a lot of asphalt. The proposal is to get a parked car running parallel on one side, and then there's a travel lane, another travel lane, and then parked car on the other side. Now these cars are not at the same angle. One is parallel to the curb, and the other is at 45-degree angle. Because 60 feet allows you to do that. This requires 16, 12, 12, 11, and 8. So we've done this before many times. We know that will work in this particular setting. Okay, why are we doing this? Well, GDOT has a resurfacing project. They're putting money into this project, and it's of no cost to the city. So that's a major way to help move the redevelopment around that spiral a little bit with GDOT help. Okay, so it spurs economic growth. The place is better. Now, Gain Street, the data on Gain Street are that they had about $30 a square foot for leasable property on Gain Street when they started, before the street was finished. And then afterwards, it grew to $60 a square foot as kind of an average asking price for retail places along Gain Street. So it doubled. It doubled. That's proven economic benefit from doing the lane reduction and the redevelopment of Gain Street. And so what are we doing? And once again, we're converting the outside lanes to parking. You can put the angled parking on the south or the north, wherever the redevelopment has a higher demand for parking. And it can switch. It could go from the north to the south as you move down this section of 13th. And we're pushing for the 25 mile per hour posted speed. And then another phase after the GDOT finishes, the first phase, you can go back and do median treatment. You can put in larger trees at that time. You can narrow the pavement, and that'll help manage the speeds. That's the presentation. That is the goal for the project, to end up with something that looks pretty much like this. So I'd be glad to take any questions on any of these slides. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Either way, do you know what the average rental cost is at the moment per square foot on 13th Street?
It's below 30. It's below 30. Business people? 5 to 7. You're approaching the carpet and tile people. All right, carpet and tile businesses. You go to where they are. They're in some of the most unfortunate business segments of your street network. So yeah, it's less than 30 where Gaines started. Yes, sir.
What were the vehicles per hour on Gaines Street?
Very similar. Gaines Street had 20,000 vehicles a day, and 13th has 20,000 vehicles per day. So the cars were moving through in the same kind of volumes and the same kind of peak hour volumes. And Gaines, again, was not a commuter route. It had a lot of activity, so it went up and it stayed pretty active all day long. That's the way you get 20,000 vehicles through on a 2-lane street for the entire day. If you just had an AM peak and a PM peak, it would be more like 16,000, 15,000. So don't let anybody tell you you can't do that road diet. The daily traffic is thus and such. You have to look at the hourly traffic. That's the only thing that makes any difference.
Did it maintain? Gainesville, did it maintain that traffic count?
Yes, it did. It did. And there were some traffic, there were some counts that were at 24 beforehand, and it's more like 20 steady now. And people began to take some other routes, and it worked out quite to the advantage. There are numbers that I'll get for later on, but the total real estate value of all the properties in the corridor went up by hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars for Gaines. It is really a large number. I would say in several millions at minimum that were added to the value of Gaines Street before instead of after. I mean after instead of before.
Can you go back to the slide where you cut the street, sliced it, and showed the lanes?
Yes.
Right there, it seemed like you lost a foot at the bottom on the proposed with the roadway. unless my math is incorrect, that totals 59 and it's 60 up top. And I was wondering if the sidewalk expanded, but it don't look like it did.
No, those are still 10. Well, we generally make up the difference in the median. So the median would be 11 instead of 12. Okay, but you really need a 12-foot lane behind ankle park cars. That was probably the imbalance. We probably ran it through and then changed an 11 back to a 12. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Sharp eye, sharp eye. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll change that slide. Yes, sir.
I guess my question is, where do we go from here? I know you're meeting with city council today, right?
Yes.
So, like, where are we at as far as this project goes?
Okay, I'll take a stab at this, then if somebody else can mention their vision of the near future and the far future. City council tonight, they're not going to vote tonight. This is an informational meeting for them. But hopefully at a pretty recent time in the near future, if they're supportive, then it could be voted that this is the vision for 13th. Then there's a process of getting with DOT and engineer to engineer, elbow to elbow at the table saying, all right, how long should the left turn lane be at 10th? And how are we going to transition from this one lane to 2 lanes going up the viaduct? All those kind of details, mainly at the intersections. That's where things get complicated, as you know. And what kind of signal timing are we going to have now that we have a 4-lane and a 2-lane, and get all that revamped? So then the GDOT project will probably be designed through the spring and the summer and the fall, and even into the winter, and they would probably start construction as soon as the weather gets nice enough next spring, a year from now. Okay, they don't do a lot of paving in January, February, and March, and even in the south, because you need to have the warm temperatures to work all the asphalt. Okay, and for the labor to get out there and work. You know, you don't want to be really uncomfortable. Any other questions? Is that a fair?
I think that's a fair assessment. It'll go to city council, and unless city council approves for a change in the striping, then GDOT, when they bid it out, will restripe it exactly how it is.
Okay.
So the process would be for council to request GDOT to restripe it in a different striping.
And then you do have plenty of time for the design details to be worked out on each of the intersections as you move through the corridor. Question?
How often between striping, when would be the next time this would be revisited?
You mean from GDOT's perspective,
Yeah.
how often do they restripe or resurface?
Yeah.
Not frequently. I mean,
Depends on the condition of the road, the traffic volume, the funding available.
And so, and the timing of this was based on the opportunity with GDOT.
That's correct.
Okay, so,
Would we consider this a generational opportunity?
20 years? Is that what you're thinking?
When was it last time? 15 years?
Take a look at the condition of the current street. Okay, look at this. That's a problem. There's some problems. There's cracks. It's pavement that's well beyond its useful life. Does anyone in the room remember when this was last resurfaced? It's been a long time then. Yes, ma'am, you had a question.
Yes, sir. Really appreciate you coming out. Have you added anything as far as like bike lanes or bike lanes?
That is to be determined when the detailed designs come in. Our thought is if we can get the speed to be 25, then there is a whole range of bicycle rider, as you well know. There's the little kids with the tassels coming out of their handlebars, and mom and dad riding with them. on the casual end, all the way up to what we call the spandex people on the high end, where they've got rear view mirrors off the corner of their glasses, so they can look behind them, and they will be in the road. Okay, the top 2 or 3 bicycle skill levels will want to be in the street, acting like a vehicle, and at 25 they can do that, and the rest of them can do quite well pedaling along slowly on the sidewalk, and so that's the current vision for cycling in this particular stretch. Yes, sir.
Do you know the mix of funding we're talking about right now between like GDOT and local? Because that's the only pushback I see.
I think it's 100% GDOT on the resurfacing.
They're gonna resurface and restripe anyway.
Yeah.
Which leads to my question, is follow up to
Let me
that.
add on to that, the phase one that he showed in different phases, the phase one would be fully funded by GDOT. The addition of the tree planting, the changing of the signals, that could be a combination of both. That is not something that's budgeted or funded.
Would that include sidewalk conditions? Because the sidewalk conditions are just as terrible as the street.
That would be part of the initial project.
That would be a part of the resurfacing by GDOT?
We hope.
GDOT said today that they will take care of the ADA requirements. That's the Americans with Disabilities Act. They will make sure that you have ADA compliant ramps that go to the sidewalks from the street and back. So they will be doing work on almost every corner of every intersection, because the ADA condition out there today is not that good. So they'll be acting, they'll be very active at all 4 corners of each of the intersections.
So with this being a state highway, are they also responsible for the lighting that will take place along the street?
They are, but in the resurfacing program, they don't often do lighting.
Let me make sure I understand. This area is in a tax elevation district, correct? That is correct. So if, for phase 2, 3, and 4, if there were changes being made, there might be money available for street improvements at that time.
It's a possibility.
Perhaps.
Perhaps a possibility, not possible.
Yes, sir, in the back.
So you got this massive piece of infrastructure in a 6-lane viaduct that if it's DOT, and they're giving up a third of that, or at least two lanes, are they, if I own a bridge, and I've invested in building it, I'm hesitant to give up a third of it.
Well, they're not giving it up. They're not giving it up. What they're doing is making it possible to reassign the mobility use to other modes, okay? Because walking and biking are very important to GDOT, just like they are Florida DOT and every other state in the union. It's just a switch of mode, not an abdication of use of the road in total.
I was just going to say another way of thinking about it is you can also see this as a democratization. So if you're only privileging the people who can afford a car, that's only right. That's drivers of income and age, right? So we can see this as a democratization of this public space, which it is, right? It's owned by everybody. Rather than seeing it as a sort of a taking away, another way is an opening up.
I was just trying to anticipate resistance,
Sure.
and that's all. That's my thought.
Can I make a comment about that? This would be in keeping with DOT's policy. They now have what they call a complete streets policy, where they look at other modes of transportation and access and that sort of thing. So this would be in keeping with their standards that they've developed.
Do you need us to follow you to city council and rah-rah behind you?
Why, sure. No, it's time to become part of the accelerators on that growth spiral. Okay, do your part is my advice. And they pay a lot of attention to what their voters say. Yes.
I'm imagining that the bus stops right now probably just have a sign that says Metro. Would a bus stop be improved as well with some maybe a covered bus stop, like if it was raining, somebody could sit and wait for the bus? Or is it just going to be a sign?
That's up to the city's allocation of resources for the bus service, and it's up to citizens that bring to their attention that that's important to the citizens. I can tell you that if you think of the different modes as far as constituency, for the automobile drivers, there would be a lot of strong comments coming back, because they're people in the middle of their lives. They're physically capable, and they're driving. They've invested in their vehicles, and so they're the strongest constituency that might arise for an elected official. And then think of the biking community. The biking folks are fairly organized, and they will get together as a group and pepper elected officials with requests for things. But the transit community, the people that ride the buses, depend on them, working 2 jobs, 3 jobs. They don't have the time to be constituents for a better transit system. So other people have to watch out for the benefits that the transit users would get a hold of.
And a minute ago, someone down close to the front asked if we should go to the council meeting and join Rick. So do you want to mention?
Sure. We invite you to join us. Rick is going to be presenting. Rick is going to be presenting an executive summary of this evening to Columbus Council, and we invite you all to join us there. And we've been advised that it'll probably be 6:45 or 7 before this comes up on the agenda, so we don't want you going directly and sitting there from 5:30 on, unless you just enjoy the council agenda. But you'll get a short version of that. Be great if you could come, and so we will be there and invite you to join us. Trying to think if there's anything else that I need to. Are there any more questions for Rick? I want to let y'all know, I want to thank our partners, Trey Carmack, Wilbergen, Jackson Bergen Development, Carmack Realty. They have helped make this study possible, and we really appreciate that. We thank all of you for your interest, your commitment to a vibrant community. We received 10 days ago, when on Rick's first visit, I guess that was 2 weeks ago, Rick's first visit here, we had just received, out of the blue, an email. And it was somebody who frequently comes to downtown and to Midtown for dining and coffee. They don't live in either downtown or Midtown. And they were proudly showing their favorite part of town off to family. And they were driving on 13th Street in between Uptown and Midtown. And the question was, from all the family members from out of town, what happened here? These are 2 great parts of town, but what happened in between? And I think that's something we all need to be cognizant of. I know I do it. I put on blinders and rose-colored glasses. The combination sometimes allows you to miss a lot. But I think if you take a look at this lovely poster board, you get a sense of this is what we're driving through every day. So we residents should expect more, and our visitors and potential residents need to see better. And our connections, we've got a great opportunity here, starting with a GDOT resurfacing project. So thank you all for coming out. Please stay in communication with us. If we want your feedback, we want your thoughts. I know you all will share that. So thank you all for being here. Is there anything
And I've
else
got
we need
one
to?
more thought. I would encourage each of you to actually go out onto the sidewalks near 13th and experience some of this. Don't go during the peak hour when the traffic slows down naturally, but go in the middle of the morning or the middle of the afternoon or early in the evening and just experience what it feels like to have the traffic going through in at the speeds they're going now. It can be pretty terrifying. And this is my radar gun I mentioned. These are $200 from Amazon. You can have it in 2 days. Take it out there, and you can tell people, you know, I clocked people at 47 miles. I clocked people at 32 miles an hour. It's kind of a fun thing if you need a hobby.